Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep, way back in time today, to a conversation that's been echoing for over 2 millennia, really shaping how we think about society and, well, ourselves.
Absolutely. This deep dive takes us straight into the heart of Plato's The Republic. It's, one of those books you hear about constantly, a bedrock text of Western thought, wrestling with that fundamental question. What is justice? Not just out there in a city, but inside us, inside an individual.
Right. And we've got a fantastic source guiding us through this dense, brilliant work and analysis that really pulls out the core ideas. Think of it as your maybe express ticket into grappling with some truly profound philosophy without having to tackle the whole massive book yourself.
Exactly. Our goal here is to identify those essential nuggets, those key insights, see what Plato was really getting at, and crucially, connect them to the kinds of questions and challenges we still face today. We'll explore his vision of the ideal society, the power and purpose of education, and his fascinating, maybe somewhat bleak view on how things fall apart.
So if you've ever looked around at the world and wondered, what a truly just society would even look like, or maybe even questioned what it means to be a just person in your own life, this deep dive is definitely for you. Let's jump in. Okay, before we get totally lost in the arguments, let's just quickly ground ourselves. Who was Plato and what was happening when he was writing this?
Well, Plato he's huge in philosophy. He was Socrates' most famous student, and then later he taught Aristotle, so his influence is, hard to overstate.
And the timing of the Republic, that's pretty significant too, isn't it?
Oh, critically so. He wrote it around 380 BC. Now, this was about 2 decades after his mentor, Socrates, was actually executed by the Athenian democracy.
Wow.
Yeah, and that event profoundly shook Plato's faith in the political systems he saw around him. He'd also seen, this short-lived, pretty brutal oligarchy that Sparta imposed, and that failed too. So he was really searching for something else, a truly stable, just foundation for both the state and the individual's soul, because he was pretty unsatisfied with the options he'd witnessed.
That context makes a lot of sense then. It really fuels his search for something better, something more fundamental. And the Republic, it doesn't just start with a lecture, right? It starts in a very specific, lively setting.
That's right. It opens during a festival down in Piraeus, which was the court of Athens. It's this almost casual get-together, but it quickly turns into this intense philosophical debate about justice, pulling in people from different walks of life, different ages.
And the first person to offer a definition is old Cephalus. What's his take?
So Cephalus, he represents traditional morality, maybe slightly unexamined morality. His definition of justice is pretty simple, straightforward, just telling the truth and paying your debts.
Okay.
It's the kind of solid, reputable behavior you'd expect from a good citizen, especially, as you get older and want a clear conscience.
Seems reasonable enough on the surface.
Yeah.
But Socrates, true to form, he doesn't just nod along, does he?
No, not at all. Socrates immediately hits him with that classic hypothetical. What if you borrowed a weapon from a friend, right? And now that friend has gone completely mad. Is it still just to give the weapon back?
Well, clearly not. That would be incredibly dangerous.
Exactly. And there's the first crack in that simple definition. Justice can't just be about following rigid rules, even if they seem like good rules, if following them leads to harmful, unjust outcomes.
Right, it has to involve more thought.
It has to involve some consideration of consequences, a purpose. Giving a madman a weapon fits the rule, pay your debts, sure, but it completely violates a deeper sense of what justice should achieve, which is surely not causing harm.
Makes sense. So, next up is his son, Polemarchus. He picks up the thread, but offers a definition that sounds a bit more like loyalty, or maybe even revenge.
Yeah, Polemarchus voices a very common, almost tribal understanding. Justice is helping your friends and harming your enemies.
That feels like something you still hear today, maybe in politics or even just personal arguments. How does Socrates handle that one?
He tackles it on a couple of fronts. First, the practical problem. How do you really know who your true friends and enemies are? People aren't always what they seem on the surface.
Good point.
So if you act to harm someone you think is an enemy, but you're mistaken, and maybe they're actually a good person, well, you've committed an injustice based on faulty judgment. Justice shouldn't be built on just subjective opinion or error.
Yeah, that makes sense. Feelings aren't a solid foundation for objective justice.
And even more fundamentally, Socrates argues that justice is a virtue, right? It's a quality that's supposed to improve things. Harming someone, he says, actually makes them worse, less virtuous, perhaps even more unjust themselves. Justice should elevate, not degrade.
Okay, so like a skill.
Exactly. He uses analogies. A doctor's skill heals, it doesn't make the patient sicker. A musician's skill creates harmony, not noise. So a just person's actions should make others, or the state, better, not worse. It's a powerful point suggesting justice isn't just some tool you use selectively, help my guys, but an inherent quality tied to goodness and improvement.
Okay, so simple rules don't quite cut it. Subjective loyalty has problems. This brings us to the really challenging voice in the room, Thrasymachus. His definition is just pure cynicism, right?
Thrasymachus is the ultimate might makes right guy. He just jumps in, basically shouting that justice is nothing more than the advantage of the stronger. Simple as that. Rulers are the strongest, they make laws that serve their own interests, and then they call that justice.
Oh.
He completely denies any objective standard. For him, it's just about power and self-interest. He even flat out says injustice is more profitable and desirable for the individual.
That must have felt like a direct attack on Socrates, who, dedicated his whole life to seeking justice and truth.
Absolutely. It's an assault on everything Socrates stands for. And Socrates pushes back hard. He uses that craftsman analogy again. A doctor, when acting as a doctor, serves the health of the patient, right? Not primarily their own financial gain in that role. A ship captain, as captain, aims for the safety of the crew and ship, not just their own comfort. They exercise their skill for the benefit of the object of their care.
So following that logic, a true ruler, as an expert in ruling, should act for the benefit of the people they rule?
Precisely. And Socrates also catches him on a logical point. Rulers aren't perfect. They can make mistakes. What if a ruler accidentally makes a law that's not actually in their own interest? If the people obey that law because it's the ruler's command, then justice defined as obeying the law isn't the advantage of the stronger in that specific case. Thrasymachus' definition kind of falls apart when you consider ruler error. It fundamentally misses the point that true expertise serves its purpose, which, in ruling, should be the well-being of the state and citizens.
He also makes an interesting point about even unjust groups needing some justice internally to function.
Yes, this is a really crucial insight. Think about a game of thieves. Even they need internal rules, some level of trust, cooperation, to actually function effectively as a gang and pull off heists, right?
Yeah, otherwise they just fall apart.
Exactly. If they were completely unjust to each other, constantly stealing from each other, betraying each other, trying to kill each other, the group would instantly dissolve into chaos. Plato's argument is that even for wicked aims, some degree of justice, or at least order and trust, is necessary for stability and collective action. Total injustice leads to chaos and impotence. This suggests real strength and effectiveness aren't just about raw power, but require some foundation of internal justice.
Wow. So book one really clears the decks. Justice isn't a simple checklist. It's not just about loyalty to your side, and it's definitely not just whatever the powerful say it is. It points towards something more fundamental, linked to function and the common good.
It's the necessary opening move, really. Plato dismantles these common, maybe superficial understandings to make space for his own much deeper, much more complex theory. But the challenge isn't over yet.
Right, because Glaucon and Adeimantus step in book two and basically say, okay, Socrates, you shot down their arguments, but you haven't really convinced us that justice is truly valuable for its own sake.
Exactly. They voice that persistent worry that maybe people only act justly because they're afraid of getting caught, afraid of punishment, or they just want a good reputation. And they present the famous Ring of Gyges thought experiment.
Ah, yes, the ring that makes you invisible.
Right. If you had this ring and could do absolutely anything, steal, cheat, even kill with zero consequences, wouldn't you, and wouldn't pretty much everyone, choose the unjust path? Because it seems, on the surface, more profitable and more pleasant. They really push Socrates to prove that a just life is inherently happier and better than an unjust life, even if the unjust person gets away with everything and the just person suffers terribly.
That's a huge challenge. And Socrates' way of tackling it is, well, it's kind of unexpected. He decides to build a city.
Yeah, he proposes building an ideal city in speech, as he calls it. His reasoning is that justice in a city is like justice in an individual soul, but magnified writ large, and so it should be easier to spot and understand there first. Once they find justice in this ideal city, they can then look for its counterpart in the individual soul.
Okay, so they start with the absolute basics, the healthy city. What's that like?
This is the city of necessity. It's really simple. People come together out of mutual need, food, shelter, clothing, basic stuff. It's built on a simple division of labor. Farmers farm, builders build, weavers weave, each person doing the job they're naturally best suited for. It's efficient, meets basic needs, Very functional, but maybe a bit boring.
Right, because human desires aren't usually that simple. People want more, which leads to the feverish city.
The city of luxury. Suddenly, desires expand way beyond just necessity. People want richer foods, bigger houses, fancy decorations, art, servants, perfumes, you name it. This increased consumption requires more land, more resources, which inevitably leads to conflict with neighboring cities.
And conflict requires defense.
Exactly. This need for defense and offense potentially necessitates a whole new specialized class of warriors, the guardians.
Yeah, and these guardians are absolutely central to the city's safety and justice. They need really specific qualities, almost contradictory ones, right?
They do. They need to be tough and spirited, like good guard dogs, fierce enough to protect the city from any external threats. But at the same time, they have to be gentle and, importantly, philosophical towards their own citizens to prevent them from becoming internal tyrants. Balancing these qualities requires incredibly rigorous training starting from a very young age.
And part of that training involves some very strict rules about their lives, especially concerning money and property.
Yes, this is one of Plato's most radical and maybe controversial ideas. To prevent corruption and ensure their loyalty is purely to the city, the guardians should not own any private property or possess wealth. They live communally, receiving only what they need for subsistence from the city itself.
Why such extreme measures?
The idea is to completely align their personal interests with the well-being of the state. If they can't get rich, if they don't have private families or property to worry about protecting, then personal enrichment or nepotism can't conflict with their duty to protect everyone impartially. Their only interest becomes the city's interest.
That core principle still echoes today, doesn't it? When we think about rules designed to prevent conflicts of interest for people in positions of power, like judges or military leaders.
Absolutely. Think about ethical guidelines for judges who have to recuse themselves if they have a personal connection to a case, or rules limiting gifts or outside business dealings for police or military personnel. Plato identified a fundamental tension. Concentrated power is easily corrupted by self-interest, especially economic interest. A truly just state, in his view, requires its protectors to have their interests completely aligned with the common good, even if that means significant personal sacrifice.
And to explain why different people are suited for these different roles, rules, guardians, producers, Plato introduces the myth of metals.
Right, this is presented explicitly as a kind of story, a noble lie, designed to foster social harmony and encourage people to accept their place in the city's structure. The myth says that people are born with different metals mixed into their souls by the gods. Gold for those naturally suited to rule, those dominated by reason, silver for those suited to be guardians, dominated by spirit or will, and bronze or iron for those suited to be producers, artisans, farmers, dominated by appetite or desire.
But the crucial point you emphasize is that this isn't strictly hereditary, right? It's not a caste system based on birth.
Critically, no. That's often misunderstood. Plato is clear. A child born of bronze parents could potentially have gold in their soul and should be identified and moved up into the ruling class through education. Conversely, a child born to golden parents might only have bronze potential and should join the producer class. Education's role is absolutely vital here. It's meant to identify a person's natural talent, their dominant metal, and then guide them to the role where they can best contribute to the city's overall well-being. A just city, for Plato, is one where everyone is doing the job they are naturally best equipped for, creating a kind of functional harmony.
And this three-part structure of the city rulers, guardians, producers is the key to understanding justice in the individual soul, because the city is essentially a giant mirror of the soul.
This is the core analogy that runs right through the entire book. The three classes of the city directly correspond to the three parts that Plato proposes make up the human soul. The rulers, the philosopher-kings, represent reason, the logical, calculating, truth-seeking part. Reason's job is to guide. The guardians represent the spirited part, thumos. This is the part associated with anger, indignation, honor, courage, ambition, willpower. It's the emotional drive that should act as reason's ally, enforcing its decisions. The producers represent the appetites, the basic desires for food, drink, sex, comfort, money, physical satisfaction. These need to be kept in check and obey the commands of reason supported by the spirit.
So justice in the soul simply means these three parts are in the right order, with reason firmly in charge, directing the other two.
Exactly. A just person, or a person with a well-ordered just soul, is one where reason rules over the appetites, and the spirited part acts like a loyal soldier, supporting reason's authority and helping to control the appetites. It's all about achieving internal harmony, psychic order, and self-mastery. Injustice, then, is the opposite. It's internal rebellion, when the appetites or the spirit usurp reason's role, leading to inner conflict, lack of self-control, and ultimately a chaotic and unhappy life. It's a really powerful idea. Justice isn't just something external, it's fundamentally an internal state of being, a kind of psychological health and balance.
Okay, but this internal harmony, this rule of reason, it isn't something you're just born with, right? It has to be cultivated.
Yeah.
And that brings us back squarely to the importance of education.
Education is absolutely central to Plato's entire project, especially the incredibly rigorous training needed for the guardians, potentially leading them to become the philosopher-kings. And this education has to begin from the earliest age.
And he's famously critical of the traditional Greek education of his time, particularly the stories they told children, like the myths from Homer and Hesiod. Why?
He argues pretty forcefully that these myths are actually unsuitable for shaping young, impressionable souls. They portray the gods as, well, frankly awful, sometimes deceitful, petty, quarrelsome, driven by lust, fearful of death. And the heroes often act immorally too. Plato believed that the stories children hear are absorbed deeply and fundamentally shape their character and their view of the world.
So he thought these stories set bad examples.
Precisely. To cultivate virtuous citizens, especially those destined to rule, the myths and stories they are exposed to must present virtuous models. Gods should be portrayed as perfectly good, truthful, unchanging. Heroes should be depicted as brave, temperate, just.
This sounds like it leads straight to the controversial idea of censorship.
It does, and it's one of the most debated parts of the Republic. But it's crucial to understand his specific context and aim here. Plato isn't necessarily advocating for censoring adult political debate or philosophical inquiry in the same way. His primary focus is on the content children are exposed to during their most formative years, when their character is being molded.
So it's about character formation,
Yeah.
specifically for the young.
Exactly. The principle is about ensuring that young minds are nurtured with virtuous examples to cultivate noble souls, rather than being confused or corrupted by tales of divine or heroic wrongdoing. It's less about restricting information broadly and much more about carefully shaping foundational values through the power of early narratives and art.
Okay, that reframes it a bit. So what does the full educational path look like for these potential future rulers? It sounds intense.
It's incredibly demanding, spanning decades. It starts in childhood with physical training, gymnastics for the body, and carefully selected music and poetry for the soul stories with the right moral content. Then comes rigorous testing of their character. They're deliberately exposed to temptations, hardships, and fears to see if their commitment to the city's good holds firm, if they maintain their rational principles.
And after that, it gets more intellectual.
Much more. After that, there's a long period, maybe 10 years, dedicated to studying mathematics, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, harmonics. These subjects are crucial because they train the mind to think abstractly, to move beyond the visible physical world and grasp unchanging, intelligible realities. This prepares them for the highest and most difficult study. Dialectic, which is essentially philosophical reasoning, the ability to ask and answer questions about the true nature of things, to grasp the forms.
And only after all that theory do they get practical experience.
Yes, only after mastering dialectic do they return to the cave, so to speak, gaining practical experience in military command and political administration for about 15 years. Finally, if they prove themselves capable and virtuous throughout this entire process, only then, in their later years, around age 50, are they deemed ready to rule as philosopher-kings. The goal isn't just to fill their heads with facts, but to fundamentally transform their whole being, cultivating deep judgment, wisdom, and an understanding of the good.
And this whole journey from focusing on the fleeting physical world to grasping abstract truths, and ultimately the highest realities captured so powerfully in what's probably the most famous analogy in all of philosophy, the Allegory of the Cave from Book 7.
The Allegory of the Cave is just Plato's masterpiece image for the effect of education or the lack of it, and the soul's ascent towards true knowledge. He asks us to imagine people chained in a dark underground cave since birth, facing a wall. Behind them, a fire burns, and puppeteers carry various objects along a low wall in front of the fire, casting shadows onto the wall the prisoners are facing.
And the prisoners, seeing only these flickering shadows, believe they are the sum total of reality.
Exactly. That's all they've ever known. The shadows are real things to them. The cave represents our familiar world of sensory experience, the things we see and hear. The shadows are like superficial perceptions, illusions, maybe mere images or opinions we get from others. Think about getting all your information from fleeting social media trends or gossip without ever looking deeper. The fire behind them is like the physical sun, the limited light source of the visible world.
So what happens when one of these prisoners is freed? It's not easy, is it?
No, it's a painful, disorienting process. This represents education. First, the prisoner is forced to turn around and see the fire and the actual objects casting the shadows. They realize the shadows weren't the real things. This is difficult. Their eyes hurt from the firelight. Then they're dragged forcibly up and out of the cave into the blinding sunlight of the outside world.
That must be even more overwhelming.
Totally. It's painful and confusing at first. They can barely see. Gradually, though, their eyes adjust. First, they can maybe see reflections in water, then the physical objects themselves, trees, people, animals, and eventually they can look up and see the source of all the light, the sun itself.
And the sun, in this allegory, represents something incredibly important.
In the allegory, the sun represents the form of the good. This is Plato's ultimate principle, the highest reality. Just as the physical sun illuminates the physical world, makes things visible, and allows life and growth, the form of the good illuminates the intelligible world, the world of the forms, making them knowable, and it is the ultimate source of their being and value. It's the highest object of knowledge. Everything rational, every striving, is ultimately aimed, implicitly or explicitly, for the sake of the good.
So the philosopher's journey out of the cave culminates in understanding this ultimate reality, this form of the good. It's like seeing the source code of the universe.
Kind of, yeah. It's a direct intellectual apprehension, a grasp of the fundamental why and what is of everything, seeing how all truths and values connect back to this ultimate principle of goodness. And Plato uses this whole ascent out of the cave to map out different levels of reality and the corresponding levels of knowledge or understanding.
Can you quickly walk us through those levels?
Sure. At the very bottom, inside the cave, looking at the shadows, that's the realm of mere imagination or illusion, Acacia. It's like believing in superficial appearances, being easily swayed by rhetoric or images without thinking critically. Then, still inside the cave, looking at the physical objects casting the shadows, that's the realm of belief or perception, Pistis. This is like understanding the physical world, classifying things, having opinions based on sense experience, but not understanding their underlying nature or purpose.
Okay, then outside the cave.
Outside the cave, looking at the physical things illuminated by the sun, but maybe indirectly first, like reflections or thinking about mathematical objects. This corresponds to the realm of thought or understanding, dianoia. This involves using reason and hypotheses, moving beyond mere perception, understanding relationships and structures, like in mathematics.
And the final, highest level.
That's looking directly at the sun itself, apprehending the form of the good and the other forms directly. This is the realm of dialectic or pure intelligence, noesis. It's the direct grasp of ultimate reality, understanding the true essence of things, seeing their interconnectedness under the light of the good.
And the philosopher-king, then, is the person who has actually made this entire difficult journey, climbed out of the cave, and apprehended the form of the good.
Exactly. This extraordinary experience, this direct knowledge of the good, is what uniquely qualifies them to rule. They aren't guided by fleeting popular opinions, personal desires for wealth or power, or the shadowy illusions of the cave. They are guided by the highest truth and the ultimate standard of value. They understand what is genuinely, objectively good for the state and all its citizens because they have seen goodness itself.
And because they've seen this true, brighter reality outside the cave, they're actually reluctant to go back down and rule in the dim, confusing world of human politics.
Yes, this is one of the most striking and counterintuitive aspects of Plato's philosopher-king. Having experienced the profound truth, beauty, and clarity of the forms and the good, the political life of the cave, the squabbling over shadows, the pursuit of power seems pale, petty, and ultimately undesirable.
So why do they rule at all?
They rule not because they want to, not out of ambition or a desire for power, but out of a sense of duty, a duty to the good they've apprehended, and a duty to try and help their fellow citizens, still trapped in the cave, to live the best possible lives according to that good, even if those citizens resist or don't understand. It's a powerful idea. The best potential leaders are precisely those who don't actually crave power for its own sake.
Yeah, that really sets them apart entirely from typical politicians we might think of, who seem driven by ambition or winning popularity contests.
Completely. Their motivation comes from understanding the good, not from personal gain or seeking the approval of the crowd. They are guided, ideally, by wisdom and justice itself.
And even if a literal philosopher-king ruling a perfect city seems like, well, pure theory, maybe even utopian, the concept itself still serves a purpose.
Absolutely. The ideal city ruled by reason, governed by someone who understands the good, provides a standard, a benchmark. Even if it's unattainable in perfect practice in the messy real world, it gives us a model against which we can evaluate existing societies and, perhaps more importantly, evaluate ourselves and our own internal governance. It's a vision of what true political and psychological health could look like, a goal to strive towards. And Plato seems to suggest that the process of striving, of turning ourselves towards that light, is what truly matters.
But Plato wasn't just a utopian dreamer. He was also realistic. He knew societies often fall far short of this ideal, and he describes this decline, this degeneration, in quite some detail in Book 8.
Yes, he presents a fascinating, if somewhat deterministic, theory of political and psychological decline. It's like a downward spiral away from the ideal state. Each inferior form of government arises, he suggests, from the failures and corruption of the previous one, and crucially, each type of government corresponds to a dominant part of the city's collective soul and the dominant part of the typical individual soul within that state.
Okay, so starting from the peak, the ideal is the aristocracy.
Right. Aristocracy meaning rule by the aristos, the best in this case, the philosopher-king or a group of them, guided by reason. This is the state where reason is dominant both politically and ideally in the individual souls of the rulers. Perfect harmony and justice.
But what happens when that commitment to reason, to philosophy, starts to weaken?
When the next generation perhaps neglects that rigorous education or the focus shifts away from pure reason and wisdom, the spirited part of the soul, the part concerned with honor, ambition, victory, takes over. This leads to democracy.
Democracy, rule by honor.
Yes, rule by the honor lovers, military heroes, people driven by ambition, competition, reputation, and status. Plato saw ancient Sparta as an example. The spirited element, courage and ambition, becomes the dominant force in the city and in the souls of its ruling class. Reason takes a backseat to glory.
And from a focus on honor, the decline continues. Where does it go next?
Yeah. Well, the desire for honor and status often becomes intertwined with and eventually overshadowed by the desire for wealth. This leads to the rise of oligarchy, which is rule by the rich.
So money becomes the defining principle.
Exactly. Money becomes the primary value. Political rights and offices are determined by property qualifications. The city becomes starkly divided into two hostile camps, the wealthy few who rule and the impoverished many who are excluded. The soul in an oligarchy is dominated by the necessary appetites, but specifically those focused on acquiring wealth. There's still some self-control, but it's driven by the pursuit of profit rather than virtue or honor.
That kind of division, the huge gap between rich and poor in an oligarchy, seems inherently unstable, like it's destined to erupt.
It is, according to Plato. The resentment of the poor, who see the rich indulging while they struggle, eventually boils over. The rebellion of the poor against the oligarchs leads to the next stage, democracy.
And Plato's description of democracy is, well, it's pretty critical, isn't it?
It's very critical. It's important, again, to remember his context. He lived through the Athenian democracy that condemned his mentor Socrates. He portrays democracy as arising from an excessive, unchecked desire for freedom, where all desires and lifestyles are treated as equally valid. There's breakdown of hierarchy, a lack of respect for authority and standards. Everyone is free to live exactly as they please, pursuing whatever whim takes them.
He uses some striking images, like teachers fearing students, or even pets being treated with excessive license.
Yes, suggesting a loss of natural order and proper distinctions. His main critique is that this absolute freedom, this lack of discerning standards, leads to license and chaos. And ironically, he argues, this extreme freedom and disorder can create a deep societal yearning for a strong hand, for someone to come in and restore order. He sees the democratic soul as fragmented, ruled by a chaotic mix of unnecessary and indulgent appetites, flitting from one desire to the next without principle.
And that yearning for order, born out of democratic chaos, creates the opening for the final and worst kind of rule in his scheme.
Exactly. Tyranny. Out of the chaos and lack of discipline in the late stages of democracy, a strong man emerges, often posing as the champion of the people, promising to restore order and control the excesses. But this leader quickly consolidates power, eliminates rivals, and becomes a tyrant, ruling through force, fear, and manipulation. And the tyrant himself, Plato argues, is the most miserable of all, enslaved by his own most lawless, base, and paranoid desires. The tyrannical soul is completely dominated by its uncontrolled, unlawful appetites, the furthest possible state from the harmony and self-mastery of the just soul ruled by reason.
So the path of decline is clear. Aristocracy slides into democracy, which decays into oligarchy, which collapses into democracy, which ultimately descends into tyranny. And for Plato, the type of government fundamentally reflects the dominant value, the dominant impulse in the people and their rulers.
Precisely. It's a kind of macro-political psychology. The state is the soul writ large, and its health or sickness reflects the health or sickness of the souls within it. The decline happens fundamentally when reason loses control, and the lower parts of the soul, first the spirit, and then especially the appetites, usurp the ruling function, both in individuals and in the city as a whole.
Let's circle back then to the pinnacle, to that concept that the philosopher king grasps, the form of the good. How absolutely crucial is this concept to Plato's whole picture? It seems like the linchpin.
It really is the capstone of his metaphysics and his ethics. As we touched on with the sun in the cave allegory, the form of the good isn't just one form among many others like justice or beauty. It's somehow higher than them. It's the ultimate source of all the forms being, their reality, and their truth. It's what makes them intelligible, knowable to the intellect, just like the sun makes physical objects visible to the eye.
And it's what everything ultimately is aiming for, even if people don't realize it.
Yes, that's a key part of Plato's argument. He suggests that all rational action, all inquiry, all striving is ultimately done for the sake of the good. We seek knowledge, we pursue justice, we appreciate beauty because we implicitly recognize these things as participating in or leading towards the good. The form of the good is the ultimate, often unarticulated target of our reason and desire.
And the philosopher king then, having actually apprehended this ultimate reality, this form of the good, is uniquely equipped to rule precisely because they understand what is truly objectively good.
Exactly. They've seen the ultimate standard, the guiding principle for everything. This allows them, theoretically, to make laws and structure the state in a way that genuinely promotes the well-being, virtue, and harmony of the whole community, not based on shifting popular opinions, shadowy illusions, or selfish interests.
And again, that reluctance to rule is actually a key indicator of their fitness to rule.
It's almost like proof. It shows they are motivated by duty to the good itself, a sense of obligation to implement what they know to be true and best, rather than being driven by the corrupted desires for power, fame, or wealth that Plato sees as motivating lesser rulers. They accept the burden of ruling as a necessary service, a return to the cave to try and help those still trapped within its confines.
So the ideal city and the philosopher king, even if they seem completely unattainable, serve as these vital benchmarks, pointing us towards what it truly means for reason to be in control, both in society and within ourselves.
Precisely. They offer a vision of health, both political health and psychological health, against which we can measure the imperfections of reality, and maybe more importantly, the state of our own lives, our own souls. Striving towards that ideal, the process of turning our own souls away from the shadows and towards the light of reason and understanding, that seems to be the core of Plato's practical challenge to his readers and to us.
Okay, so pulling all of this together then, the deep dive into the nature of justice, beyond just simple rules or raw power, the whole city-soul analogy, the absolute crucial role of education in shaping character, the allegory of the cave showing these different levels of reality and knowing, the theory of decline when reason fails, the form of the good as the ultimate target, and this compelling vision of the reluctant, wise ruler. It becomes really clear that the Republic is about so much more than just political theory, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at its very heart, you could argue it's primarily a guide for how to live a good life and how to become a good person. Justice, as Plato ultimately defines it, is presented primarily as an internal state, that harmony of the soul when it's properly ordered under the guidance of reason. He's fundamentally challenging each of us to examine our own inner lives, our own psychic constitution.
And thinking about it that way, it raises some really pointed, maybe uncomfortable questions for anyone listening today. Like, are you, for instance, navigating this constant flood of information, conflicting values coming at you from media, online, everywhere? Are you just accepting the shadows on the wall? Or are you actively trying to find a deeper standard, Plato's good perhaps, to evaluate what's actually real and what's truly valuable?
Yeah, and it makes you wonder about your own willingness to act on what you believe is right. Have you ever felt that strong internal pull to stand up for something, for justice or truth as you see it, even when it felt really difficult or unpopular, or might have had negative personal consequences for you, like Socrates himself faced?
And it's easy to get discouraged sometimes, isn't it? When you look around and you see people who seem to be thriving, maybe gaining power or wealth, while acting in ways that seem pretty unjust. Does that ever make you question the intrinsic value of striving for virtue yourself? Plato grappled with exactly that perception.
And what about education? Think about its purpose today. Is it seen primarily as just a means to acquire skills for a job, instrumental knowledge, or do we still value its deeper potential purpose, which Plato emphasized so strongly, cultivating reason, critical thinking, independent judgment, and ultimately wisdom?
And maybe put yourself in a position of power, even a small one, maybe at work, leading a team, or in a community group. Could you genuinely be impartial in your decisions, truly aiming for the common good? Or would you find yourself subtly favoring people you like, or making choices based on what's best or easiest for you personally? That conflict of interest Plato worried about.
And maybe the toughest question, are you prepared for the discomfort, the intellectual struggle that comes with genuinely challenging your own most deeply held beliefs and biases? It's not easy to willingly step out of your own personal cave and really question whether the way you perceive the world actually matches up with a deeper, more objective reality.
Ultimately, it feels like Plato's most profound challenge is directed squarely at each one of us. Are you willing and able to become the ruler of your own soul? Are you consciously ensuring that reason is in command, guiding your choices and actions? Or are you letting your desires, your emotions, your fears, or maybe just external pressures and opinions dictate the course of your life?
It's a timeless challenge, isn't it? Moving from that potential internal chaos he described towards achieving that internal harmony, that inner justice.
So, reflecting on all this, what really stands out to you from this deep dive? It's just incredible how relevant these ancient ideas, these questions from 2,400 years ago, still feel today.
They really do. I think for me, it's how Plato gives us such a powerful, integrated framework. It connects the political and the personal so deeply. It lets us examine not just the societies we live in, but the internal state of our own minds, our own souls. Are we letting reason lead the way, or are we allowing other forces, maybe less noble ones, to take control?
Yeah, it really makes you pause and think. Are we spending our lives chasing shadows, chasing superficial appearances and fleeting desires? Or are we genuinely trying to strive for something more real, something like Plato's good?
It's definitely something profound to sit with and mull over. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Plato's Republic.
We really hope this has sparked some new connections for you, maybe some aha moments, and perhaps given you a different lens, a Platonic lens, through which to view the world and, importantly, yourself. Until next time.